but the benefit of working on your company, of dialing in your operations, your systems, your processes, your scripts, your SOPs, the way that you want the work to be done, it takes time. You have to sit down and take your mind off your clients and put your mind on your business. And that's this catch 22 of, do I invest the time in making my business better so that long term I reap the benefits of a more efficient, productive, profitable operation?
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. On today's episode of the Business of Advice podcast, I am excited to welcome Chris Ronzio, who is the founder and CEO of Trainual. This is a service that if you're not using or aren't familiar with, you will be, and you'll want to use it after we get done with our conversation. Trainual now serves businesses in almost every country, I think every country, except for maybe a few, and it's been recognized on Inc.'s Best Workplace list. Chris is a two-time EY Entrepreneur of the Year, Mountain Desert Region Award finalist, and hosts two great podcasts, The Fastest Growing Companies and Organized Chaos. You'll want to check those out also. More than that, author of this book, The Business Playbook, which is really what we're going to dig into. It's how to document and delegate what you do so your company can grow beyond you. Chris, you've been a huge partner here at Advisors Excel, but great to have you on the Business of Advice podcast.
Thanks, Cody. It's great to be here. I'm excited to chat for the next bit.
Well, so advisors that are with us and listen to this are very familiar with Trainual. This has been something we've been using now for the last, probably a couple years now. We've been partnered with you all. And not just we use it here internally, but so many of our advisors have started using it. But why don't we start with, tell us about your journey and what led to you creating Trainual?
Yeah, so the journey started actually with my first business. I was 14 years old. And I started a video production company. And so a lot of kids might start little side hustles, and that's what mine was in high school. But as it grew through high school, through college, I ended up running the business for 12 years. We had 3 offices across the country. We did productions in all 50 states, thousands of productions. And as I was scaling that company, I realized that packaging up who you are and what you do and how you do it is really the key to a successful scaling business. And when I couldn't be at all these productions at once, I needed to hire camera operators and editors and production managers and teach them how we operate around the country. And so after 12 years of doing that and selling my first business, I started helping other companies get their operations in order. And so I would go company to company, I'd dial in their roles and responsibilities and operations manuals and map out their processes. And I thought, this is crazy. Everyone's doing this on documents and Word docs and Dropbox folders. So Trainual was an idea to centralize all that, to have a product that you could just fill out and tangibly make a difference with your systems and processes.
We have seen that. As I said, we're big users here at Advisors Excel. A lot of our advisors are using it. But for people who maybe aren't as familiar, just will you walk through and maybe describe how people are using it, how you see them using it in their business right now?
Yeah, so Trainual, as the name suggests, is a training manual, or we call it a business playbook. It's a software where you can get your new hires, your new employees up to speed and productive in your business. And then you keep all of your existing people up to date and operating at your best practices. And so inside the platform, you document and train all the different common knowledge in your business. And it spans across 4 elements. And that's what we say is in the playbook. And so those 4 elements are, first, your company's profile, which, think of this as like your culture, your history, your milestones, your vision and values. It's the DNA of your business. Everyone needs to know your profile. Then you've got the people in your business. That's your org structure, your departments and teams, your roles, responsibilities, and bios. All of that is getting to know your coworkers in the business. And then you've got your policies and your processes. Your policies being like your handbook, and your processes being those standardized procedures. And so all of that knowledge is housed inside Trainual, and it's one system to access anywhere you are.
We're probably going to jump into some of the benefits of it, but one of the things I think when we first started rolling this out, especially to advisors, we probably got some pushback, and we ended up creating this model office where we were able to work with you all to load all these best practices from some of our top advisors into where the advisor could almost, like, I hate to say cut and paste, but maybe that's a good way to think of it. But I think the reason we did that is some of the pushback we got in the beginning was like, man, this is a lot of work to go get all of these things documented, to get all of this inputted in there. Is this really going to be worth our time? I've seen the benefit, and we'll probably talk about some of the benefits of that. But maybe is there a way for you to answer that question of like, what are the benefits to doing this? And then follow that up with any best practices or advice on like, if nobody's started on really documenting these different policies and processes and procedures, like what are some best practices around how to do that?
Yeah, so the benefit, it doesn't just involve our tool. It's, you don't have to have a software to do this, but the benefit of working on your company, of dialing in your operations, your systems, your processes, your scripts, your SOP is the way that you want the work to be done. It takes time. You have to sit down and take your mind off your clients and put your mind on your business. And that's this catch 22 of, do I invest the time in making my business better so that long term I reap the benefits of a more efficient, productive, profitable operation? And so introducing a tool like ours just makes it easier. So it's actually less time in using our system because we are prescribing what to do. We're prompting you with AI tools to help you brainstorm what to outline. We're helping write parts of it for you. We're, telling you what other people are doing. Like you said, with the model office setup, we want to say, here's what great looks like. Copy and paste or borrow what you want to use, what works for you, and maybe tweak or modify if you need to, but it gets you most of the way there. And so our mission is just making this easier so that everyone can have a playbook. That's what it's really about. It's you want a systemized way to run your business. If you haven't done this work before, if you're starting kind of from scratch, then I always recommend people start with the basics. If you had any new person start in your company, you have to teach them how your business works, kind of the overview, start to finish, your orientation. I feel like that's the easiest place for advisors or for anyone to start, is they have to teach everybody, hey, you're day one at my operation. Here's what we do. Here's what we sell. Here's our products or services. Here's what your job is. Here's why we're in business. Here's what the brand is all about. There's those basics that every single person in the business needs to know. And so if you start with that stuff, then you get the highest ROI because every single person in the future will go through that material.
There's a couple places I've really seen our advisors benefit, but I would say this would apply to any business owner. It could be small, medium, even large. One is, as that small business is hiring and growing, I think one of the biggest challenges every small business owner has is like creating or making that time to be able to train new people as they bring them on, right? If you have 2 or 3 employees and you hire a couple more, like trying to find the time to train. And that's where I think we've seen just a huge benefit here. It's like, you don't have to spend a ton of time. If you put the work in up front, if you utilize so many of the tools that you all have, you can give them some training resources out of the gate to get them up to speed. The second area I think I've seen it be a huge benefit is, I'm going to call it consistency across offices. So as we have advisors who are opening multiple locations, right, having that central, training manual to where all of those offices know this is how we do things, this is how we're going to operate, is a really, really important step in that. This is, I don't even know if there's really a question in here so much, but it's just like, how have you seen advisors use that from I know we've talked about documenting, but then actually implementing the training side of that to where you get that, hey, teaching someone what we do here, but then also that consistency across, multiple locations possibly.
Yeah, so I'll go first to that idea of explaining something once, saving yourself the time for onboarding new people. If you have to train manually every new person that walks through the door, or every new person, if it's a revolving door, every new person that replaces somebody or comes into your business, it takes a ton of time. And so you are going to explain it once. You have to. You've got to say it once. So you might as well record it that time that you said it, or write parts of it down and document it in a system, because now other people, every other person that comes after, can replay it. It's funny, we have a local sports team here in Arizona that uses the product, and once a year they were doing this training for their 1,200 employees. And then if you started after that date, you had to wait 365 days or whatever until they did that training again. And so just the idea of capturing something that other people can watch asynchronously, it just saves you an incredible amount of time. And so that, explain it once is that first concept. And then to the point about consistency, this is something that I think every business that has more than one person doing the same task deals with. Like if you have two people doing something, one of them is going to be better. One of them is going to have best practices. And you want to constantly be making your best practices your standard practices. I remember when Trainual was young and we had 3 sales reps, we realized all 3 of them were doing demos in 3 different ways. And so obviously they had different close rates and different deal cycles. And so we zoomed out and we looked at it and said, well, who's doing best? What do we copy from their slide deck or from their talk track? Now let's document that in the system. Let's push it out to all of our sales team so that they go through the training and they're held accountable for doing it the company way. And so that's what Trainual is really providing. It's going from doing it your way, doing it one way, doing it a bunch of different ways, to doing it the company way.
A few podcast episodes ago, I had Jonathan Musgrave on from Steep, and he actually referenced like Trainual's been a game changer for their business. One of the things he talked about, and maybe ask you just to share any like best practices you've seen from all of the businesses that you work with, but he's like, man, anytime something comes up, like maybe a question comes up, someone's like, hey, how do we handle this? He's like, we'll just hop on, record something real quick, load it into Trainual, right? So we're just building this like archive in this library of stuff. But he said, one of the things he says, it doesn't always have to be me as the owner who does it either, right? If other people come up with something or do something, they'll record, load it up in there. Have you seen any best practices to how to just tap the collective wisdom and knowledge of your organization to enhance and improve the training?
Absolutely. So you definitely want to infuse this into your culture. You want to celebrate when people are documenting and creating that content. And you want to democratize it so that everybody has that ability to create material. And so in our product, we have something where each person can be marked the designated owner of a process or a piece of content. And they'll be the one that's reminded to keep it up to date if it's getting stale, if a lot of people are looking at it. And so they're constantly getting pinged to say, is this material still relevant? Is it still up to date? And so you want to crowdsource this across your company, because the reality is none of us know every single thing that's happening in our business. As our companies grow, they spider out and you start doing different things and trying new things, experimenting. And then at some point you don't know everything anymore. And so you want to lean on the rest of your team and celebrate when they're doing it. And then you can introduce that lingo and say, is it in Trainual? Make a Trainual. I hear a lot of companies saying that.
Yeah.
And another thing they'll do is maybe at weekly meetings, they'll talk about here are the new processes that we rolled out or updated, or they'll give kudos to each other. And again, it's just kind of perpetuating that this is part of the culture.
One thing that we have used Trainual for in our office, and I know a lot of our advisors too, is what we would call learning paths, where we can set up these clear paths for someone steps into a role. Here's the things that we are going to want you to go learn, spend time on so you can get good at your job. A couple benefits, but then I just want you to talk about the optics behind it. Like one, it's I think especially younger employees really want these learning paths, right? They want to know, like, if I go do these things, that's great. For us, one of the things that I think we love also is, as the leader, we have some optics into what they're doing there. Can you talk just through the value of that, just being able to create these paths for people? But then I think for us, it's great to be able to see, like, who's taking this serious. One of our core values is always be growing. So I said in the past, we had to kind of assume who was growing, by who it seemed like was doing a good job, where now we can really look in and say, like, no, this person is getting after it, man. They're going through their learning paths, they're completing all these trainings that we have in place. Just, I know it's been huge for us. Maybe talk about the benefits you've seen of that in a lot of the companies that you're working with.
Yeah, so when I hear training paths, there's a few different areas that touches. So the first is just someone's initial onboarding. A lot of times at a company, you can have an onboarding experience that's like a fire hose, where you get everything at once and there's no sequence to how you're supposed to internalize that information. And then you can forget a lot of that stuff. And so the first kind of training path you want to develop is for your new people to slowly drip out the content in the weeks that are appropriate based on how they're really getting up to speed in your workplace. And so that initial training path or sequence is really important. Then beyond that, career pathing, we have this system that you create all these different roles, these positions or titles within your business. And so you may have more senior levels in your company that you can associate content to, and people have the ability to request access or start to take that content. And that's, like you said, if always be growing is part of your values, you want people reaching for that next position, and they can have some transparency into what do I need to know or what do I need to do in this next role so that I can start chipping away and learning that content. And then there's also the reporting. And so to have the ability to see who's done what, how many subjects or modules has each person completed, really easy when we just go right to the reporting section. It's harder to do that offline.
Yeah, so much harder. I kind of mentioned that always be growing being one of our core values. I know you talk about like building the profile of the business, and core values are a big part of that. This is a little off the Trainio path, I guess, more as you've built this as a leader. But one of the things you talk about in your book is the idea of like how you all went about, I'll say building your core values, but I think you say even kind of how your core values emerged at Trainual. Would you just, as people start thinking about that, like kind of the vision and the mission and the core values, I'd love you to just share some of the wisdom and ways that you built and developed those as you guys were building Trainual.
Yeah, so our core values at Trainual actually came from my consulting firm, which preceded Trainual. And so before we launched Trainual as a software SaaS product to the market, it was available only to my consulting clients. And so it was through the consulting business with a handful of employees that we developed our initial core values. And so the exercise that I talk about in the book is really thinking through, for you or for a small team of leaders, who have been the most exceptional people you've ever worked with, and who have been the ones that just really didn't work out, that you just, something was off, they didn't last at your business. And then you kind of go through the attributes and you say, okay, this person that I had to let go, I really didn't like that they were always late, or I really didn't like that I couldn't put them in front of customers, or I really didn't like that, they seemed too serious and they didn't have any sense of humor. And those negative attributes, you can flip around and say, okay, well, we really value promptness here, or we really value professionalism, or we really value a sense of humor and having fun. And those are things you can then start to massage into values. So that's the first piece, is understanding the attributes, both positive and negative. And then what we like to do is put little kind of catchphrases or stories to these, because, professionalism doesn't sound so great. That just sounds pretty bland. But one of our values is show up ready. And so there's elements of professionalism in that. But what it's really about is any meeting that I come to, I'm going to be prepared. Any group project that I work on, I'm not going to let my teammates down. I'm going to show up ready. I'm going to carry the weight. I'm going to do my part. You can tell more stories around show up ready than you can tell around professionalism. And so really wrapping those phrases around the value is important. And then the last thing we do is create a lot of imagery. And so each of our each of our values has a little logo. It has, videos and stories and testimonials from our team, so that people, as they're learning, as they're introduced to the business, they don't just see a few words, but they get some substance. They get some material that backs up what this value means and how this was used directionally in the company.
I think that's one of the things I like, is like, what does this value actually mean, right? You can say something like, even for us, never stop growing. That can mean a lot of different things to a lot of different people, right? But trying to clarify within this, like telling the story behind what does that mean. And I always try, and even I spoke just as we're recording this yesterday, we had a new hire group, and Dave or I always speak to them on their very first day when they start here, and we go through core values and what they mean. And then one of the things I love to do is like actually pick an employee and use that as an example, right? So when I talk about never stop growing, I talk about David, who started with us as an intern, right? And now it's like the number 2 person in our entire creative team, and just like what I've seen him do and trying to tie that back in. So there's this meaning, behind those core values also.
Oh, yeah. I love that. Using people is great. we celebrate them. So every quarter when we do our all hands, we have awards for each of the values. And so we'll pick one person from the company that represents the value. Their manager will come on, tell stories about, here's what they did with
It's
their
great.
customer. Here's what they did, over the last quarter. And so it continues to reinforce this. It's super important.
Some other things that are out, I want to talk just about as you built and are scaling the business. Like, when and how did you identify this as an opportunity? What made you say, okay, this is where I'm going all in, right? So I think a lot of times people may see an opportunity but not necessarily capitalize on it. So what was it that made you see hey, I think there's an opportunity to actually build a business now around this? And then what were kind of the first steps in launching that and turning it into what it is today?
So there were a few aha moments. It was like a peeling back the aha onion here. So first, when I had my consulting business, I had this client that was doing custom t-shirts. They were a retail store, and every quarter they were hiring a new batch of students from the local university. And so their workforce would 100% turnover. And they had this 80-page PDF that they would send the new students and say, hey, read this, and then show up and just kind of stand around and watch us. And I thought this is horrible. There has to be a better way. Let's make some training videos. Let's teach them how to make the t-shirts, how to use the point of sale system. And so that was the initial moment that was like, okay, I feel like I can make a software for this. And then for the first couple years, that was all it was a software for my consulting clients. So the next kind of aha was I was scaling the consulting business. I hired a consultant in Nevada and Reno, one in Austin, Texas, and I was teaching them on my consulting model using Trainual. And both of them were like, hey, this program is really cool. I know some other companies that could use this program. And around the same time, some of my past consulting clients had referred business that didn't necessarily want the consulting, but they wanted the software. And so all of that was leading me to think, okay, this is a scalable thing. Instead of charging for my time, what if I just give away my time and I do podcasts and I do videos and I do marketing content and I speak at events, and instead I monetize this through a subscription product, a software product that's really accessible. I thought that the cool thing was I could affect 100 times or 1,000 times as many businesses. And so that was ultimately why we spun out the software.
You may have hit this next question I was going to ask you a little bit, but as the founder and CEO, as the business grows, scales, becomes more complex, you have to get really good at understanding where you add the most value to the organization. How did you go about figuring that out, and what does that look like today versus maybe what it looked like when you started the company?
Yeah, so for me, I got some great advice early on to always be becoming the CEO the company needs a year from now. And so it's like, as the company keeps scaling, there's this horizon that keeps moving. The goalpost keeps moving. And so I need to continuously push myself. And so one thing that I do is a quarterly audit of all of the responsibilities on my plate. I walk through this in my book actually as well, but I practice what I preach. And so this quarterly audit of responsibilities is first just thinking through a time-based approach. What do I do every week, every month, every day, every quarter, every year? What are the meetings that I attend? What are the things that come through my plate? So you brainstorm all of that. And then you go through your tools. You start with your email. You look through maybe your last month of sent mail. This is the trick I like. Our inboxes could be a disaster. Mine is not. I do inbox zero. But if yours is, just look at your sent mail, because then you see everything you interact with. You see the stuff you send. You see the stuff you reply to. You see the stuff you forward that you're a bottleneck for. So tons and tons of responsibilities hidden in there. Look at your calendar. Look at your project management system. All of this is used to brainstorm your responsibilities. And you probably have dozens of these. And so every quarter, what I try to do is carve out one or two or three things that I am not going to do 90 days from now. And that becomes a hit list for me of figuring out whose plate should this be on, what training or documentation do I need to create in order to effectively delegate this responsibility, or is there this new role emerging that maybe takes a little bit from me, a little bit from this person, a little bit from this person, and that's going to be a next hire in the business. And so it's just quarter over quarter of that across all of my leaders that has really made the company just continue to, divide and turn into what it is today.
As you have continued to grow and scale the company, what have been some of your biggest challenges in scaling?
So scaling at every stage of a business is different. At the beginning, it's about not doing all the work yourself and finding some other people that you can offload the work to so that you can work on making the business better. But then even then, you can't do all of the work of making the business better. You can't manage all the people. So then you start to, hit where you need a leadership team and you need to build out management and different departmental leaders. And you don't have visibility into everything in the business anymore. And so now you need to be able to manage results through other people. And that's a point of scale. Once you get there, it's really about, you've got this team that's functioning, but how do you feed everybody? How do you keep it going? And so you need to be able to really scale your marketing and sales and have more predictable channels for growing the business. Another part of scaling is finding great people and continuing to find people. And so if you can keep, finding people and finding customers and keeping your systems organized, that's kind of like the trifecta for me.
That's good. I've never asked you this question. This is more of an assumption, so maybe it's a bad one to make. But I think we really started using and looking at Trainio like kind of COVID, post-COVID, right? Because it was like now everyone's remote. Like training we were doing in person, now we've got to find some different. I would assume that you saw a huge spike like COVID, post-COVID. I've never asked you that, so maybe a bad assumption. But is that accurate or not?
Yeah, March 2020, we had 1 week where we were like, okay, what's going to happen in the world? We paused our ads. We thought, I don't know. And then we said, you know what? Let's go all in. This is like everybody needs to communicate. They need training. And in that second week, our traffic to our website went up 300%. And so everybody was scrambling to figure out, how do we stay organized? How do I keep the team aligned? How do I communicate? How do I know that people have signed off on things, that everybody knows their expectations? And so it was definitely one of those catalysts in the world. But, people have been talking about systems and operations manuals and SOPs for decades and decades and decades. And it's just been something that only the biggest companies had the bandwidth to invest in.
Yeah.
And now what's changed is it's commonplace for even the smallest businesses to focus on this in order to train their first hire, their second hire, because today you need to.
Did that post-COVID, did that stress the business in any way that you weren't prepared for? Or was it like, no, we had most of the stuff in place to where we were able to handle that, increase in flow?
The biggest thing it stressed was our customer success team. So having this huge inflow of customers, we were great on the marketing side, great on the product side. But when you've just got more hands that are being raised, more questions, more people that want help with implementation or need templates for different industries, that's where we really had to scale up.
That's good. A couple just more like process questions or training questions. Should people document, because this comes up, like everything in their office, or it's like an 80-20 rule, like a better approach to that? Like, what's your advice on what you shouldn't document? How much is enough?
I've found that the sweet spot is 50 to 80% of your business.
Okay.
And so the reason for that is that every business is always innovating, is always experimenting. They're always testing new things. And so it's impossible to document everything that's going on in the business, because if you did, next week, a lot's going to be out of date, right? And so the things that you document are the consistent things in your business. It's the things that you're doing repeatably over and over and over again. And so you've got to have a reason for documenting, a reason to write things down. And typically your reason is because you've got multiple people doing something and you want it done consistently, or you're handing something off to a new person that's taking it off your plate. Those are reasons to document. But if you've got something that is a low vulnerability or it's an experiment, you're not going to get the same ROI out of those things.
You kind of brought this up, but the follow-up question I was going to ask is, how often should you revisit or update? I'm not just going to say even the playbook, right? I mean, I think that's a component of it, but do you have any like advice around how often to go look at your processes? Have they changed? Are they outdated? Do we need to update those? Is there a best practice you recommend around that?
I would say best practice is at least every 90 days or with every new hire. Uh, More frequent than that is recommended and is likely if you're really plugged into the system. But if you're not hiring every 90 days, it's good to just do a pass through every 90 days. If you are hiring, let's say once a month, then when your hiring manager is preparing that content for the next person, they can at least put eyes on it and make sure, oh yeah, nothing's changed in the last month. More what happens more typically is if you divide that ownership of different processes or content, your people are going to get reminded ad hoc all the time. A software tool changes. We don't use this one anymore. We use this one. Well,
Yeah.
now there's 7 places we want to replace that through our content. Let's do a quick search. Let's replace it. Cool. We're good now. This person just changed. Let me update them in the org chart. And make sure that everybody knows who to go to for questions. So those things just happen as our businesses change.
One final question I want to ask, then we'll jump into some lightning round questions here at the end. But I don't even know how to ask this exactly, but what I have seen, and I'm just curious your thoughts on this, and with a younger generation and maybe younger team members coming onto the team, I think it feels like in Trainio, you've built a lot of things to really cater to that audience, right? There's some gamification in it, videos, interactive stuff. I assume that's somewhat strategic, but just can you talk about the benefit, especially if you are hiring, younger team members onto your team, just like how Trainio is so much better than hey, we have a bunch of documents stored out here. Go read this 80-page PDF about how to do everything.
Yeah, the traditional document training is just like banging your head against the wall. Like no one wants that. You don't retain anything. Training is really an experience, right? It should be interactive. And the companies that do it best maybe have teams of people that are, touring you around the office and putting you in a big lecture hall and delivering impressive, entertaining content. Think about what your training would be if you had a $10 million training budget. Like you would do some incredible things. Well, how do we take that and replicate that through a software and have a good experience for the masses? So that's why we've started to develop, obviously we have video and the animations and the GIFs and the little quizzes and the pop-up confetti and the things that make it kind of fun. But where our product will continue to evolve is, imagine learning about the company by zooming through an interactive timeline of photos and stories and things like that. Imagine, getting to know your coworkers like you're flipping through a pack of baseball cards. Imagine those types of experiences are what we're developing because we want training to be an experience. We want every new person to retain the information, to enjoy learning the information, and to know that they can look it up when they need it.
So I said that was going to be my last question, but I got one more that came up out of that. What is your process that you all are using to innovate the product? Because I've seen just, a lot of new features, a lot of innovation in the short time we've been using it. Is there a formal process you're using to get feedback from clients, of a process you're using internally of let's try this? Just because as you said that, I'm like, man, there have been a lot of cool features that have been added to it.
Of course, we have a process. Of course.
Duh.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of gateways to this information. We have customers or we have employees that are on the phone with people all the time, and so they have internal channels and forms that they're filling out with ideas. All this goes to our product team. We have product managers over every area of the application, and so they're always kind of workshopping cool ideas. Then on a quarterly and semi-annual and annual basis, we're doing roadmap updates of what we want to slot in and how we want to theme certain sprints and what metrics we want to affect. And so it's a more complex process than I can explain verbally in a minute. But yeah, it starts with customers and our team, and it flows through the product and design and engineering department. And then there's a little bit of just art and magic to what we want to do when, and comes out the other end.
What percent, I'm always curious, even in our own business as we look at this, what percent of the ideas are coming from external, your customers, versus what percent is your team is constantly challenged to think through how to innovate and make the system better?
I think the small, so by magnitude, sheer volume, I would say 60 to 80% of the ideas are coming from our customers.
Okay.
But the big ideas, the most innovative things are coming through us, through partners, through consultants that are in the field, the real aha moments that no one's asking for
Yep.
that are going to change what our product looks like in the next 5 or 10 years. Like those are coming internally mostly.
I just think that's good for any business owner to think about, right? It's like you should probably be internally the one that's coming up with the big ideas, but you should be listening to your customer for how to make those incremental improvements in the business also. So it's just interesting to hear you say that. So, okay, I said, final question a few ago, but now let's jump into this lightning round questions. The first one is, what lessons starting with COVID as you rethink things maybe, is there one lesson you learned that you're going to carry forward for the rest of your life or your career?
I was trying to think the last couple years. I would say that the rooms that the people I've met and the rooms that I've found myself in, the relationships I've built have had far more ROI than I ever expected. And so, yeah, I remember someone told me years ago, get in the fanciest room you can and buy the nicest suit you can afford. That's that sort of thing. And it was like, if you rub shoulders with the right people, good things will happen. And so that's been on my mind.
That's good. Second question, a little bit like this, but like, what is the one thing you've done that graduated you from being a good leader to a great leader?
Stop watching what people are doing. It was, less overseeing, more empowering. Just set the goal and not let them come up with the instructions.
Yeah, that's good. Especially as the business grows and scales, you can't manage all of that, and I think that's a hard transition for so many entrepreneurs to make, right? You're so used to being involved in everything early on in the business life that as it grows, you just can't have that same level there. So empowering others is going to be magic for growing the business. Okay, speaking of growth, is there something you are doing this year or let's say over the next year to drive your own personal growth and development that you're excited about?
Yeah, so something I started this year is a 3-year program at Harvard Business School that I got into. And so I spent a month there in May, totally disconnected from the business, going back next year and the following year. So I wanted to really challenge myself again, be the CEO that the company needs a year, 2 years, 3 years from now. And wanted to be in a room with some other international leaders as we look to expand more internationally.
That's cool. That's got to be a lot of fun, and I'm sure very challenging also. So, okay, fourth question. Cannot be your book, although people should grab it, but what is the one book that you've recommended most to other entrepreneurs or leaders?
Let's see. The one I've been talking about recently, I read, I think it's called The Ride of a Lifetime by Bob Iger from Disney.
Yeah.
And I really liked reading these biographies that talk about, a day in the life of CEOs that are operating at a different level as me, because then I can see the gap between them and me. And I think at this stage, that's what I'm thinking about. What is a public company CEO life like?
Yeah, no, that's a great book. It's not to shamelessly plug another podcast, but have you listened to the Founders podcast at all? It's kind of blown up late. It's spectacular. So if people are listening to this, not to divert them away from this one, but it's called Founders Podcast, and he actually reads all these biographies and then gives you this recap of like, here's what and how they were doing things. So you'll love it.
Cool.
It's right in line with that. Okay, final question. What is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
I remember. Let's see. I remember my mom telling me really early on that confidence is attractive, but cockiness is not. And I think that balance between being confident but being humble is a recipe for being a great leader. And it's always stuck with me.
That is, great advice to end this on. So, Chris, I appreciate not just your time today, but how great of a partner Trainio has been for us and our advisors. I know it's made a huge impact on the lives of a lot of our team members, but also a lot of the advisors we support. We talked about your book, your 2 podcasts. Maybe you just want to plug those again, though, and can you let people know the best way to kind of follow along and connect with you?
Yeah, absolutely. So you can check out the podcast content, Fastest Growing Companies or Organized Chaos, tons of YouTube videos online. The book is just the Business Playbook. You can go to thebusinessplaybook.com or search it wherever you get your books. And then the easiest place to follow me is Instagram or LinkedIn, just at Chris Ronzio if you want to see it behind the scenes.
All right, Chris, I appreciate the time today. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me. This is fun.